guys. Welcome to Wednesday, Wellness Wednesday. And today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 6 and 7 from The Thief of Always. Before we begin, though, I want to just remind us very quickly that sophisticated readers, such as yourselves, of fantasy, research the setting, so pay very close attention to clues about the holiday house, okay? Many of us know the place, but as you can tell, there's a lot going on at the holiday house. It almost sounded like yesterday like the house was talking, a house to Harvey, okay? And I don't know about you, but besides the place, setting also has to do with time. And I'm having a hard time trying to figure out the time period of this book. So try to pay attention to that. We also know we ask about power, sophisticated readers. Who has it, evidence, and the kind of power. And it doesn't seem like Harvey has much power, right? But who does? And then the third thing, like we talked about yesterday, we're learning alongside Harvey. So Harvey's confused about a lot of things, and we need to pay very close attention to when Harvey asks questions. That'll help us to better understand the setting, right? And the holiday house. So here we go. Chapter 6, Seen and Unseen. I'm going to move this up here. I'm also going to move this. Okay. I should have had this ready. Here we go, chapter 6. Well, said Wendell as they ate, what are you going to be tonight? I don't know, Harvey said. What are you going to be? A hangman, he said with a spaghetti grin. I've been learning how to tie nooses. Now all I've got to do is find someone to hang. He eyed Mrs. Griffin. It's quick, he said. You just drop 'em and snap, their necks break. That's horrible, Mrs. Griffin said. Why do boys always love talking about ghosts and murders and hangings? Because it's exciting, Wendell said. You're monsters, she replied with a hint of a smile. That's what you are, monsters. Harvey is, Wendell said. I've seen him filing down his teeth. Is it a full moon? Harvey said, smearing ketchup around his mouth and putting on a twitch. I hope so. I need blood, fresh blood. Good, said Wendell. You can be a vampire. I'll hang 'em and you can suck their blood. Horrible, Mrs. Griffin said again. Just horrible. Perhaps the house had heard Harvey wishing for a full moon, because when he and Wendell traipsed upstairs and looked out the landing window, there, hanging between the bare branches of the trees, was a moon as wide and as white as a dead man's smile. Look at it, Harvey said. I can see every crater. It's perfect. Oh, that's just the start, Wendell promised, and led Harvey to a large, musty room which had been filled with clothes of every description. Some were hung on hooks and coat hangers. Some were in baskets like actors' costumes. Still more were heaped at the far end of the room on the dusty floor, and half hidden until Wendell cleared the way was a sight that made Harvey gasp. A wall covered from floor to ceiling with masks. Where did they all come from? Harvey said as he gaped at the spectacle. Mr. Hood collects them, Wendell explained. Turn the page. And the clothes are just stuff that kids who visited here left behind. Harvey wasn't interested in the clothes. It was the masks that mesmerized him. They were like snowflakes, no two alike. Some were made of wood and of plastic, some of straw and cloth and paper mache. Some were as bright as parrots, others as pale as parchment. Some were so grotesque, he was certain they'd been carved by crazy people. Others so perfect, they looked like the death masks of angels. There were masks of clowns and foxes, masks like skull decorated with real teeth, and one with carved flames instead of hair. Take your pick, said Wendell. There's bound to be a vampire somewhere. Whatever I come in here wanting to find, I find it sooner or later. Harvey decided to leave the pleasure of choosing a mask until last, and concentrated instead on digging up something suitably bat-like to wear. As he worked through the piles of clothes, he found himself wondering about the children who'd left them here. Though he'd always hated history lessons, he knew some of the jackets and shoes and shirts and belts had been out of fashion for many, many years. Where were their owners now? Dead, he presumed, or so old it made no difference. The thought of these garments belonging to dead folk brought a little shudder to his spine, which was only right. This was Halloween, after all, and what was Halloween without a few chills? After minutes of searching, he found a long black coat with a collar he could turn up, which Wendell pronounced very vampiric. Well satisfied with his choice, he went back to the walls of faces, and his eyes almost immediately alighted upon a mask he had previously seen, with the paler and deep sockets of the soul just risen from the tomb. He took it down and put it on. It fit perfectly. What do I look like? Harvey asked, turning to face Wendell, who had found an executioner's mask which fitted him just as well. Ugly as sin. Good. There was a flickering family of pumpkin heads lined upon the porch when they stepped outside, and the misty air smelled of wood smoke. Where do we go trick-or-treating? Harvey wanted to know. Out in the street? No, said Wendell. It's not Halloween out in the real world, remember? We're going to go around to the back of the house. That's not very far, Harvey remarked, disappointed. It is at this time of night, Wendell said creepily. This house is full of surprises. You'll see. Harvey looked up at the house through the tiny eye holes of his mask. It loomed as large as a thunderhead, its weather vane sharp enough to stab the stars. Come on, said Wendell. We've got a long trip ahead. A long trip, Harvey thought. How could it be a long trip from the front of the house to the back? But once again, Wendell was right. The house was full of surprises. The trip, which would have been a 2-minute walk in the bright afternoon, soon became a trek that had Harvey wishing he'd brought a flashlight and a map. The leaves rustled underfoot as though snakes were swarming through them. The trees that had shaded them by day now looked frightening in their nakedness, gaunt and hungry. Why am I doing this? He asked himself as he followed Wendell through the darkness. I'm cold and I'm uncomfortable. He might have added fright to the list, but he left the thought unsaid. As he was about to suggest they turn back, Wendell pointed up and hissed, Look. Harvey looked. Directly overhead, a form was moving silently against the sky, as if it had just launched itself from the eaves of the house. The moon had slunk away behind the roof and shed no light upon this night flyer. So Harvey could only guess at its shape from the stars it blotted out as it sailed. Its wings were wide but ragged, too ragged to bear it up, he thought. Instead, it seemed to claw at the darkness as it went, as though it were crawling on the very air itself. So something's flying above. A glimpse was all Harvey had, and then it was gone. What was that? He whispered. He got no answer. In the moments he'd taken up staring at the sky, Wendell had disappeared. Wendell? Harvey whispered. Where are you? There was still no reply, just the slithering in the leaves and the moan of the hungry branches. I know what you're doing, Harvey said, louder this time, and you won't scare me that easy, hear me? This time, there was a reply of sorts. Not words, but a creaking sound from somewhere in the trees. He's climbing up into the treehouse, Harvey thought, and determined to catch Wendell and scare him back, he followed the sound. Despite the nakedness of the branches, their mesh kept all but a glimmer of starlight from falling on the groves. He slipped his mask down around his neck so as to see a little better, but even then he was nearly blind and had to listen out for the sound of Wendell's ascent to guide him. He could still hear the creaks plainly enough and stumbled in their direction, his arms outstretched to grasp the ladder when he reached it. Now the sound was so loud he was certain he must be standing beneath the tree. He looked up, hoping to catch a glimpse of the trickster, but as he did so, something brushed his face. He snatched at it, but it was gone, at least for the moment. Then it came again, brushing his brow from the other side. He snatched at it the second time, then, as it touched him again, caught hold of it. "Got you!" he cried. His yell of triumph was followed by a rush of air and the sound of something crashing to the ground. At his side, he jumped, but refused to let go of whatever he was holding. "Wendell," he called. By way of a reply, a flame flared in the darkness behind him, and a firework erupted in a shower of green sparks, its light making a gangrenous cavern of the grove. By its flickering light, he saw what he held, and seeing it, let out a panicked yammering that had the crows rising from their roosts overhead. It was not a ladder he'd heard creaking. It was a rope. No, not even a rope, a noose. And in his hand, the leg of the man hanging from the noose. He let go of it and stumbled backward, barely suppressing a second shout as his eyes rose to meet the dead man's stare. To judge by his expression, he had died horribly. The tongue lolled from his foamy lips. His veins were so swollen with blood, his head looked like a pumpkin. Either that, it was a pumpkin. A fresh fountain of sparks now burst from the firework, and Harvey saw the truth of the matter. The limb he'd been held was a stuffed trouser leg, the body a coat spilling bundles of clothes, that head a mask on a pumpkin with cream for spittle and eggs for eyes. "Wendell!" he yelled, turning his back on the scene of execution. Wendell was standing on the far side of the firework, his ear-to-ear grin lit by spitting sparks. He looked like a little demon, fresh from the inferno. At his side was the ladder that had come crashing down to get the drama underway. "I warned ya," Wendell said, holding up his mask. "I said I was going to be a hangman tonight." "I'll get you back for this," Harvey said, his heart still beating too fast for him to see the funny side of this. "I swear I'll get you back." "You can try," Wendell crowed. The firework was beginning to fizzle out, the shadows around them beginning to deepen again. Had enough Halloween for tonight? Harvey didn't much like admitting defeat, but he nodded grimly, swearing to himself that when he finally got his revenge, it would be choice. "Smile," Wendell said as the fountain of sparks dwindled. "We're in the holiday house." The light had almost gone, and even though Harvey was still enraged at Wendell and at himself for being such a sucker, he couldn't let it die away without making peace. "All right," he said, allowing himself a tiny smile. "There'll be other nights." "Always," said Wendell. The reply pleased him. "That's what this place is," he said as the light went out. "It's the house of always." Besides the fact that that was a very scary scene, Harvey thinking that there was like a dead person in front of him and it was just a prank by Wendell, excuse me, we were able to kind of find out some things through Harvey's actions, right? Like the questions that he asked. As I read chapter 7, Try to jot down anything that we learn about the holiday house. Now, it was Halloween when they were outside. You're learning alongside of Harvey, and the next chapter is called A Present from the Past and is showing a Christmas tree. So I guess the seasons are once again changing. Here we go. There was a Thanksgiving feast awaiting them when they got back into the house. You look as though you've been in the wars, Mrs. Griffin remarked when she set eyes on Harvey. Has Wendell been up to his tricks? Harvey admitted that he'd fallen for all of them, but there was one that impressed him in particular. What was that? Said Wendell with a smug grin. The falling ladder. That was a clever little touch, wasn't it? No, not the ladder, said Harvey. What then? The thing in the sky. Oh, that. What was it, a kite? That wasn't my doing, Wendell replied. What was it then? I don't know, Wendell said. His smile disappeared. Better not to ask, huh? But I want to know, Harvey insisted, turning to Mrs. Griffin. It had wings, and I think it flew off the roof. Then it was a bat, Mrs. Griffin said. No, this was 100 times bigger than a bat. He spread his arms. Great, dark wings. Mrs. Griffin frowned as Harvey spoke. You imagined it, she said. I did not, Harvey protested. Why don't you just sit down and eat? Mrs. Griffin replied. If it wasn't a bat, then it wasn't anything at all. But Wendell saw it too, didn't you, Wendell? He looked around at the other boy, who was digging into a steaming plate of turkey and cranberry sauce. Who cares? Wendell said, chewing as he spoke. Just tell her you saw it. Wendell shrugged. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. It's Halloween night. There's supposed to be a boogeyman out there. But not real ones, said Harvey. A trick's one thing. But if that beast was real? As he spoke, he realized he was breaking the rule he'd made out on the porch. Whether the winged creature was real or not didn't matter. This was a place of illusions. Wouldn't he be happier here if he just stopped questioning what was real and what wasn't? Sit down and eat, Mrs. Griffin said. Harvey shook his head. His appetite had disappeared. He was angry, though he wasn't quite sure at whom. Maybe at Wendell for his shrugs, or Mrs. Griffin for not believing him, or at himself for being afraid of illusions. Maybe all three. I'm going up to my room to change, he said, and left the kitchen. He discovered Lulu on the landing, staring out the window. Wind gusted against the glass, reminding Harvey of Rictus's first visit. It wasn't rain the guests were bringing, however. It wasn't rain the gusts were bringing, however. It was powdery snow. It'll be Christmas soon, she said. Will it? There'll be presents for everyone. There always are. You should wish for something. Is that what you're doing? She shook her head. No, she said. I've been here so long, I've got everything I ever wanted. Would you like to see? Harvey said yes, and she led him up the stairs to her room, which was immense and filled with her treasures. She obviously had a passion for boxes, teeny jeweled boxes, large carved boxes, a box for her collection of glass balls, a box that played tinkling music, a box into which 100 smaller boxes fitted. She also had several families of dolls who sat in blank-faced rows around the wall. But more impressive by far was the house from which the dolls had been exiled. It stood in the middle of the room, 5 feet high from step to chimney top, every detail of brick, slate, and sill perfect. This is where I keep my friends, Lulu said, and opened the front door. 2 bright green lizards came out to greet her, scurrying up her arms onto her shoulders. The rest are inside, she said. Take a look. Harvey peered through the windows and found that every perfect room in the house was occupied. There were lizards lounging on the beds, lizards snoozing in the baths, lizards swinging from the chandeliers. He laughed out loud at their antics. Aren't they fun? Lulu said. Great, he replied. You can come up and play with them anytime you want. Thanks. They're really very friendly. They only bite when they're hungry. Here. She plucked one off her shoulder and dropped it into Harvey's hands. It promptly ran up and perched on his head, much to Lulu's amusement. They enjoyed the company of both the lizards and each other for a long while, until Harvey caught a glimpse of his reflection in one of the windows and remembered what a sight he was. Ooh. I'd better go and wash, he told Lulu. I'll see you later. She smiled at him. I like you, Harvey Swick, she said. Her honesty made him honest. I like you too, he told her. Then his expression darkening, he said, I wouldn't want anything to happen to you. She looked puzzled. I saw you at the lake, he said. Did you? She replied. I don't remember. Well, anyway, it's deep. You should be careful. You could slip and fall in. I'll be careful, she said as he opened the door. Oh, and Harvey? Yes? Don't forget to wish for something. What shall I ask for? He wondered as he washed the dirt off his face. Something impossible, maybe, to see just how magic the house possessed. A white tiger, perhaps? A full-size Zeppelin? A ticket to the moon? The answer came from the depths of his memory. He'd wished for a present he'd been given and lost a long, long time ago. A present that his father had made him, which Mr. Hood, however much he wanted to please his new guest, would never be able to duplicate. The ark, he murmured. With his face washed and the scratches he'd gotten from the thorns in the thicket worn like war wounds, he headed back downstairs, to find that once again the house had performed an extraordinary transformation. A Christmas tree, so tall that the star at its summit pricked the ceiling, stood in the hallway, the colors of its twinkling light seeping into every room. There was a smell of chocolate in the air, and the sounds of carols being sung. In the living room, Mrs. Griffin was sitting beside a roaring fire with Stu Cat purring on her lap. Wendell's gone outside, she told Harvey. There's a scarf and gloves for you by the front door. Harvey went out onto the porch. The wind was icy, but it was already clearing the snow clouds, leaving the stars to shine down on a perfect white carpet. Not quite perfect. A trail of tracks led down from the house to the spot where Wendell was building a snowman. Coming out, he hollered to Harvey, his voice as clear as bells that were ringing through the crisp air. Harvey shook his head. He was so tired even the snow looked comfortable. Maybe tomorrow, he said. I'll be back tomorrow. It'll be back tomorrow, won't it? Of course, Wendell yelled. And the night after, and the night after. Harvey went back inside to look at the Christmas tree. Turn the page. Its branches were hung with strings of popcorn and cranberries, with colored lights and baubles and soldiers in gleaming silver uniforms. There's something under there for you, Mrs. Griffin said, standing at the living room door. I hope it's what you want, sweet. Harvey knelt down and pulled a parcel with his name on it out from under the tree. His pulse quickened before he even opened it, because he knew from its shape and from the way it rattled that his wish had been answered. He pulled at the string, remembering as he did so much littler his hands had been the first time he'd held this gift. The paper tore away and fell away. And there, shiny and new, was a painted wooden ark. It was a perfect copy of the one his father had made. The same yellow hull, the same orange prow, the same wheelhouse with holes in the red roof for the giraffes to put their heads through. The same lead animals, all in pairs, snug in the hold or peering through the portholes. 2 dogs, 2 elephants, 2 camels, 2 doves, all these and a dozen more. And finally, the same little Noah with his square white beard and his fat face complete with the apron. How did he know? Harvey murmured. He hadn't intended the question to be heard, much less answered. But Mrs. Griffin said, Mr. Hood knows every dream in your head. But this is perfect, Harvey said in amazement. Look, My dad ran out of blue paint when he was finishing the elephants. So one of them has blue eyes and the other has green eyes. It's exactly the same. Does it please you then? Mrs. Griffin asked. Harvey said it did, but that wasn't entirely the truth. It was eerie to have the ark back in his hands when he knew the real one had been lost, as though time had been turned on its heels and he was the little kid again. He heard Wendell stamping the snow off his feet at the front door, and was suddenly embarrassed to have such a childish present in his hands. He gathered it up in its wrapping and hurried away upstairs, intending to head back down for some supper. I sure do eat a lot. But his bed looked too welcoming to be refused, and his stomach quite full enough for one night. So instead, he closed the curtain on the gusty night and laid his head down on the pillow. The Christmas bells were still ringing in some distant steeple, and their repetition lulled him into sleep. He dreamed that he was standing on the steps of the house, looking through the open door into its warm heart. Then the wind caught hold of him, turning him away from the threshold and carrying him away into a dreamless sleep. And that, my friends, is the end of chapters 6 and 7. I hope that you were able to maybe learn some things along with Harvey, and I can't wait to see your responses today. Make sure to email them to me and answer the questions on the flipgrid. Have a great day.